Hello everyone, thanks for swinging by Cooking on the Weekend. For today's pizza oven experiment, I'm creating something inspired from some of my greatest childhood memories. Every year for the day after Christmas, we had an awesome tradition. The whole family would get together and go to one of our favorite restaurants and catch a movie, and then meet up later that night and just play games and have a great time. And it all started at the Belgian Village. Their sandwiches were insane. They were huge, they were awesome, they were amazing. And it was at least a decade before I went to another restaurant that had French fries as good as theirs. I believe their most popular sandwich at the time was the Vanderaisin, which nearly all of my family ordered. Now my favorite was the Vanderaisin, an amazing grilled cheese and ham sandwich on awesome cinnamon raisin bread. On the menu it came with Swiss, but they always made it for me with cheddar, and I loved it. For today's video, I created 2 new recipes for cinnamon raisin bread dough. Now, I chose the one that was a little bit sweeter, and I will post the full recipe with instructions in the video description. I started off with a bunch of thin sliced ham, some crumbled cheddar, and a little bit of mozzarella. My favorite thing about this sandwich is the balance between the saltiness and the sweetness, between that cinnamon raisin bread, the cheese, and the ham. And while these are not the traditional cheeses used to this sandwich, this all works incredibly well together. Now, before I dive in too much further, I just want to say this. I created this dough recipe with some specific things in mind. I knew I was going to be loading it up a lot, so I didn't want like an airy crust. I wanted something to be dense, not necessarily as dense as a bagel, but kind of close. I definitely achieved that with this recipe. I also wanted that dough to be packed with a ton of great flavor. The ratio of bread compared to the filling was quite small, and I wanted to make sure that the flavor that came from the ham and the cheese didn't overshadow the amazing flavor of the raisin bread. So I went ahead and did a few things. I used 3 tablespoons of brown sugar for a recipe that called for 3.5 cups of bread flour. I also used 2 teaspoons of kosher salt and a whole cup of raisins. There's absolutely no way that the filling is going to overshadow the flavor of this amazing raisin bread. Now, the extra sugar definitely makes the dough a little bit harder to work with. It's very springy, it doesn't stretch out as easily, but I promise the extra effort that you'll have to put into stretching it will absolutely be worth it. Alright, to get things started, I put down 1 layer of the raisin bread dough. Then I fill it up with the toppings. You can fill these up with anything you want. You could definitely use something other than raisin bread dough if you want to do something more like, a calzone, with pepperoni and sausage. Just use like a regular white bread dough. I trim off the edges just by adding a little pressure with this mini roller, and they come out perfect. Now, you may have noticed earlier I skipped one step. I did not grease the skillet before putting in that first layer of dough, and there's a reason. I'm not planning to cook these on the same day. I've got a very cool trick for prepping in advance. This is something I figured out years ago. It allowed me to make multiple mini stuffed Chicago-style pizzas in advance and then just cook them up whenever I wanted. The trick is freezing them while inside the cast iron pan that you're going to cook them in later. After they're fully frozen, you take that cast iron, you put it on top of the stove for just a couple seconds on a high heat, and they'll pop right out. Then when you're ready to cook them, you just grease up the pan, put it back in it, leave it in the refrigerator overnight. It'll thaw out, it'll be ready to go. Normally I would just use a little bit of vegetable oil, but for this experiment, I'm replicating a grilled sandwich. So I'm loading up these 6-inch skillets with about 2 tablespoons of butter. I find it's easiest to coat the pans by hand. If I was cooking these for people other than myself, I definitely would have used gloves. Alrighty, fast forward. I nearly fully thawed them out in the refrigerator. I took them out and I let them thaw till they were at a room temperature. While I was planning to elevate them above the pizza stone, I still didn't want to have something really cold that might create a contrast in temperature and potentially crack the pizza stone. And before putting them in the pizza oven, I put on a light layer of butter on top and then wrapped them in aluminum foil. At this point, I had no idea whether this was going to take 15 minutes or 45 minutes. So I treat it like a lasagna, cover it with aluminum foil, bake it, and then pull it off and get that crisp at the end. And just thinking about that long cook time, I should share one really important thing. I will likely do this different in the future. If I want to do a really large kind of something like the sandwich here, I'll probably do it as a calzone or bake it in the oven. But this turned out amazing. It is quite literally, I'm confident in saying this, probably the best sandwich I've ever made in my life. It just took a long time. So I'll probably make smaller versions of this in the future. So for one thing, they'll cook quicker, but also it'll allow me to infuse more smoke flavor, which I really couldn't do here with the aluminum foil covering it for the majority of the cook. This cook took about 40 minutes. I didn't preheat the oven. I just put it in there and just started churning slowly and then a little faster as things went along. And then I took off the aluminum foil and gave it just a quick little bake on the outside. At the point where I removed them from the cast iron skillets and put them in directly, gave them a few turns, literally within like a few minutes I had a little blowout. As the cheese started pouring out from one of the sides, I knew I was done, they were good to go, and I pulled them on out. Now, outside of creating something that was absolutely insanely delicious and a success that I had no idea whether I'd achieve, I learned something really important. I cooked something for 40 minutes with an ambient temperature ranging between 700 and no less than 550 degrees. And the results were amazing. Just makes me think, what else can I do with this awesome pizza oven? All right, now it's time for the reveal. This beautiful, gorgeous, delicious pizza pocket sandwich, whatever you want to call it. Look at that. Super thin crust on the top, a little thicker on the bottom. This thing was just insane. The crispiness of the crust on the outside, even though it was super thin, and there was a juice explosion like you were biting into one of the greatest burgers in the world. Oh my God, I love this. You gotta try it. Now, while my memories from the Belgian village are some of my greatest memories in the world, I'm gonna say this. This is better. I just want to thank you all so much for swinging by today. Please hit that subscribe button, and you all have a fantastic week.